Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders. Brought to you by the SATC Solutions Center. You can connect with us on Instagram or Twitter, where our handle is @BridgingChicago. For more information, including our email, visit us online at satcsolutions.com. Be sure to rate and subscribe to Bridging Chicago on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this podcast.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, one of the hosts of the podcast and a senior legal assistant at SATC Law, our law affiliate. And so I want to thank you for joining us today. I also want to thank Shoshana Buchholz-Miller for joining us. She is the Executive Director of Cradles to Crayons Chicago. And Shoshana, I've been really excited to talk to you. I've been looking at what your organization does and been talking to some of the people there, and it's really exciting, and I can't wait to share it with everyone. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here too, Nathan.
Awesome. We always like to start with giving a little background on our guests because I think it's good for people to get to know you a little bit. And so we'll obviously talk all about what the organization is doing, but why don't you share with us a little bit about you? And let's start where we always like to start. Are you from Chicago, or did you move here from somewhere else?
So if you consider the northern suburbs Chicago, then yes, I am from Chicago or the Chicagoland area. I grew up actually in Highland Park and
Cool.
lived away for a little while and have been back in Chicagoland, either in the city or the suburbs for the past 20 some years, 22 years or so.
Awesome. We don't want to start any fights, so we're going to say you're from the northern suburbs.
Thank
Not
you.
Chicago.
Okay.
I know
Chicagoland.
that people.
I like to say Chicagoland.
Yes. Tell us about It's interesting when we talk to people from the suburbs because I honestly don't know much about them. I'm from central Illinois in a small town, and so everything up here is just like kind of crazy to me. But um, all the suburbs seem to be pretty different from each other. And so can you share with us about Highland Park and what it was like growing up there?
Sure. I mean, I think looking back on it, it was a pretty great place to grow up. My mother still lives in Highland Park, and it's a northern suburb, actually in Lake County. And it's on the water, and it's a town of about 35,000 people. And, I had a great kind of childhood experience of friends and good school and liked my teachers, and my parents were educators up here. And so, I think of it as like a pretty idyllic place. And I guess it kind of is known that way too, because there are lots of John Hughes movies filmed in Highland Park. And there are many. So if you've seen a John Hughes movie, you've probably seen something of a snapshot of where I grew up.
What's it like seeing your neighborhood in movies, or like knowing, oh, okay, like that was filmed down the street for me? Because I know like in Chicago, there's a lot of stuff that's filmed. I live in the Loop, so there's a lot of stuff filmed here. So it's like,
Mhm.
you would expect that though in Chicago, but like I can't imagine like being home and being like, oh, there's a movie truck right there or whatever.
Yeah, that was it was kind of for whatever reason, there was a period in the 80s and 90s, to date myself, when there were filming a ton of movies in the northern suburbs and in Highland Park in particular. So John Hughes, and then Risky Business was filmed around me, and Home Alone. And it's always been fun to be able to refer to those movies because people know them. And so
Yeah.
if you talk about Breakfast Club or Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Home Alone, like, even kids today know those movies. And so they have a sense of kind of where you lived or what it
Yeah.
looked like a little bit, even though it's still a Hollywood version of the reality.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna pretend like what I see on TV is exactly what it's like, so that I can feel like we have some connection there. And then, when you were growing up, what were your parents' interactions with you like? Were they like really supportive of you, the things that you were interested in, or did they understand those things, or sort of how did they encourage you along when you were a kid, and especially in the things that really interested you? So like, what were those things, and then how did they kind of support that?
I was an only I have two half sisters, but they were considerably older than me, so I
Okay.
really grew up as an only child. Um, and I think my parents, probably because of being able to not have to have their attention drawn between lots of kids, you know, I think focused on me and were pretty supportive of me. I
Yeah.
had my parents, my mom was a teacher, my dad was a school superintendent. They were both really into education. I was really into school, so I guess we related to each other on that level. I was interested in tons of activities at school, and they thought that was great. So it was a pretty, I mean, I don't think I made life so hard for them, and they kind of wanted me to flourish, and I think we're related to the things that I was interested in. So it was a pretty good way to grow up. My father was older, and he had grown up during the Depression. So there was a lot of hearing about how he would go to school uphill in the snow without shoes both ways, through his childhood. So that definitely was a presence in my life. But they wanted me to kind of embrace the opportunities that I had.
So there was no winning arguments for you in that house.
No, no, there was one could always pull out the Great Depression. In fact, when I, applied to college, that was one of my essays. Was the question was like, "What historical event has influenced you most?" And I wrote about the Depression. But I think about it now. I have 3 kids now, and I always tell them how, like, they're gonna get to write about the pandemic, and they're gonna get
Yeah.
to tell their kids, like, "You don't wanna go to school? I couldn't go to school." Right? I
Right.
could have given anything to go to school. So,
Yeah.
at least they'll have that going for them.
Yeah, I guess every generation has something, so you gotta have some leverage.
Right.
Um, it's always interesting to me to hear about when people graduate from high school and decide what to do next, and some people obviously take the college route and just go right from high school to college. You pick a major and you start studying that. Some people work first. People do all kinds of different things now. And so, for you, what was the choice that you made after high school? And then, sort of, how did you make that choice? Like, what were the influences of your life that helped you to decide what to do or where to go after that?
So I went straight from high school to college. I went to Duke University,
Oh,
and that was it. I don't think I spent a ton of time considering not going to college. That was something my parents really expected and wanted. As teachers and educators, they thought that was really important. And so, and I was very excited to go away and to try living in a new part of the country. I
hmm,
didn't necessarily know what I wanted to study. In I was interested in government and international relations and politics roughly, but I didn't really know what that meant, and I didn't know what I would want to do with it. But I had been kind of raised on the idea that getting kind of a broad liberal arts education would set you up to do something that was
yeah.
interesting and exciting. And so I didn't really feel pressure to figure that all out. I just was excited to be in a new place and meet new people and kind of, be also in a really rich learning environment that also had some really great sports teams. So,
Yeah, and speaking of sports teams, I happen to be a North Carolina fan, a UNC fan, so
oh, I hope that we can still be friends.
yeah, we can get through the podcast, but I can't promise you much
Okay.
more than
All right.
no, I was just it's such a fun rivalry, so I think it's great. Um, but it's interesting because, like, such a young age, you're trying to figure out what you wanna do in life, and you can only go based on what you know up to that point, and then the people that you trust in your life to sort of speak into that. So a lot of people we find do either switch majors or they end up doing something very different than what they studied and all that. And so I think it's good that people that even when you pick a major, even when you decide to do something, it's not like, okay, this is what I have to do forever. I can always try new things, or just go out there and do something else, or kind of take a very hard left turn if I need to. And um I'm glad to see that more and more people are just doing all kinds of different things and not getting locked into one area.
I think it's so I have a daughter who's a senior in high school now, and
Okay.
she is trying to figure out what she's going to do next year, and she's wants to go to college, and she's thinking about where she's going to apply. And she doesn't really know what she wants to do, and I don't expect her to know that because she's 17.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it is true that a number of her peers and a lot of people will ask her, "Well, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Do you know what you want to study?" She's a English, history,
Hmm.
politics, maybe. I mean, it's not like a pre-professional thing, and I really, am supportive of that because I do feel like it's really hard at the age of 17
Yeah.
to chart a course and make a commitment about and some a lot of kids do it, but I understand if you don't want to because I have to say that looking in my career, I never there was no grand scheme. There was no grand plan to end up here where I am today. And there's probably not a grand plan for where I'll be by the time I retire. So I think it's good to be able to be flexible and take it as you come. And it's hard to expect people at 17 to to chart a whole course.
Kind of speaking on that too, because I think one of the things that keeps us from doing certain things is that fear of failure, where it's like, if I do it and it doesn't work out, what am I going to do then? Have you ever felt that where, being worried about maybe not doing something as successfully as you wanted? And then how do you sort of approach that, or how do you deal with that and say, and push through and say, no, like, regardless of the outcome, I think this is still worth giving time and effort to.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, certainly in my career and in different projects that I've worked on, I've had those moments of uncertainty about is this going to be successful? And you never know if something's going to be successful unless you do it and finish it. Because if you stop in the middle or stop before you do it, you don't know the answer. And I think I've been involved in things that I've been given the room to have some ability to fail. But I also think that it's okay to figure out if there's something that isn't working for you. And the best
Mm,
example I can give is for me personally is, I went to graduate school and I was living abroad. I was living in the United Kingdom and I was interested in journalism. And I got a job as a business journalist on a publication, and I hated it. It was so disappointing because I really thought, I love to write, I like to talk to people, I'm interested, I like to ask questions. I thought it would be perfect for me, and I was so unhappy in doing it, and I really felt like, oh, but I should do this because all these things are supposed to be interesting, and if I don't do this, what will I do? And ultimately, what I realized is that I wasn't, being unhappy every day when you go to work is not a recipe for a happy life. And if you're 25 years old and you're doing that, what does that mean that the next 40 years of your life is like this?
mhm.
So I think you have to give yourself permission too to trust your instincts and say, like, not everything that you think is for you really is for you.
And as a leader of an organization, I'm sure that information has really been important. And I think as thinking about being led by someone, it's one of those hard truths that you might have to hear at some point, but I think is actually really beneficial for both parties.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's true. Someone told me once that, if someone's struggling in their role, and you as a leader are seeing them struggle and are frustrated, they too are frustrated and unhappy. And because they're not happy struggling every day. And so that's an important thing to remember is that both of you are unsatisfied and there's probably ways to solve it, and sometimes you can solve it successfully together and sometimes you solve it by deciding that it's not the right role for the person, but that's
Yeah.
probably a good for them in many instances.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned you were in the UK working, wasn't for you. And so what was the next phase of life for you then? Because I'm guessing you didn't go from being there to to being executive director at Cradles and Crayons,
No,
Illinois,
there's
Cradles, Crayons, Illinois,
it's
so
it's been a
Chicago.
long
So
and windy road. Um, but I did move after that. I stayed in the UK and I worked for
okay,
a nonprofit in the United Kingdom, the Multiple Sclerosis Society at the time. And I liked I liked working in the nonprofit world. And I really liked that sense of having a positive social impact and connecting with people. In particular, my job at that time, I dealt with on a regular basis people who had multiple sclerosis. We
mm,
had a helpline that I worked on, but then I worked in other kind of support services. And so I thought that was interesting, that kind of helping role and that kind of advocacy role was important to me. And so when I moved back to the United States, I got a job at a nonprofit here in Chicago called the Anti-Defamation League, and they do civil rights kind of activism and advocacy and education. And that seemed really interesting and exciting. And we did that kind of direct service. So people would call with an incident that they felt that they were being discriminated against. But we also did education. We did Holocaust education and trying to kind of apply the lessons of the Holocaust to the present day. And we did, really trying to find advocate for everyone's civil rights. And that was really exciting.
yeah,
We also did a lot of monitoring of extremist groups. So I spent time doing that,
wow,
which was interesting. And I learned a lot. And that has really, since that time, I would say the common theme for me has been working in either nonprofit or not just for profit, and also really trying to focus on social justice and human rights issues in different ways. So, that has run its course in many different ways. And after working at the ADL, I did spend 10 years in philanthropy. So, working for foundations, helping people effectively invest in nonprofits and give money away, which was really exciting. But then I've come back to the kind of nonprofit side of things too for the past 7 years.
yeah. When I think of nonprofits, one of the things, I mean, obviously, I have a ton of respect for people who work for nonprofits and the organizations that are doing important work, not just in Chicago, obviously, but everywhere. But I think about how difficult it has to be some days to work in nonprofit areas, especially like you were talking about, areas that deal with civil rights or social justice issues where maybe it doesn't feel like you're having as much success as you would hope you would, or maybe you feel like you're fighting an uphill battle a lot of days. And I don't mean to project things onto you, but just from what I've learned and from people that I've talked to, I mean, there are certainly a lot of days where you can feel like you're working uphill, or maybe it's not. Is it worth the effort that we're putting into it if we're not getting the results that we were hoping for? Versus being in a private sector where it's much more about money and it's much more about results and all these numbers and everything. So for you, I mean, what's the motivation to work in nonprofit given the difficulty of different levels of success, or even knowing how much money you're going to have to budget for the next year, or and where that's going to come from, or staffing issues, or a number of things that I'm sure you have to deal with, not just every year but day to day.
Yeah. I would say that really what drives me is the mission and the kind of
Hmm.
psychic compensation that comes along
Mm,
with the work. So I have had, it's true. I have experienced in different roles feeling burnt out and feeling like, you said it, pushing a boulder uphill. And so, after 4 years at the Anti-Defamation League, I felt tired and I felt a little like I
mm,
can't be on the front lines every single day. Even though I knew we were doing good work and I felt like it would have an impact, it just was hard. And
yeah.
so I decided to go into philanthropy. So working for foundations, because I felt like, well, that's a little bit removed. So you're not quite on the front lines, but you're still having a social impact, but you're giving money to organizations that are on the front lines. And
Yeah.
I did that. I did that for 10 years. I did that for a foundation, and then I worked for a consulting firm. So I even took a step further back. I worked for a consulting firm that would have clients that were foundations. And what I learned in doing that was, um, I was removed a bit from, even more from the mission, because I
Yeah.
was working with clients. So not doing the work myself, but even beyond that, I was leading one of the businesses in the firm. And so to what you said, my focus really had to be on our profitability and on, our different products that we were providing to our clients. And I realized that that was not what got my blood pumping in the morning. Like, what excited me in the morning was thinking about the impact, and just thinking about the issues that are important to me.
Yeah.
So trying to, those justice issues, if I wasn't thinking about them every day and thinking about, how we could impact them and intersect with them, I just wasn't stimulated.
Yeah.
And so ultimately I decided to go back to working in nonprofits, because that's the thing that makes me happy and enthusiastic. And I'm married. My husband works in the financial world, and I would say, "Oh, I just don't want to think about, our profitability." And he's like, "Well, that's why you belong in the nonprofit world and I belong in the world I'm in." And I think that's probably true. Not
Yeah.
that I don't think about money, because it's true what you said, that in the nonprofit world, especially as an executive director, you're thinking all the time about your budget and how are you going to raise all the funds that you need to to achieve your mission. So you're not free of it. It's just so inextricably linked to the mission that it's a means to an end.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the really important things is that you mentioned is the mission, because if you believe in the mission, I'm sure that makes it a little easier, and I'm sure it makes it, you know, it gets people motivated to keep doing it and inspire others to join them in that mission. And so for you, tell us about Cradles to Crayons Chicago, its mission, and then what about the mission sort of to inspire you to work with them, and then how you kind of inspire other people on the staff with that mission.
Sure. So, Cradles to Crayons provides new and gently used clothing and necessities to children from birth to age 12 living in Chicagoland. And our goal is really to provide all kids with these basic necessities that they need to thrive at home, at school, and at play. So kids today, of course, they need shelter and they need food and they need healthcare. They also need clothing and they need school supplies and they need diapers and hygiene supplies and books and coats in the winter and boots and shoes. And there really are not these social safety net supports to provide those items that I just
Yeah.
listed to you to kids. And so it falls to organizations like ours to fill in that gap
Yeah.
and to really be that safety net for kids. And so I think what was compelling to me, one of the many things that was compelling to me about the organization when I joined 3 years ago, was that while we can spend a lot of time talking about how there's not enough support for families in terms of housing and healthcare and food, there is literally no government support, federal or state, in Illinois for the things I just mentioned. And also there are a lot of people who live in our community who have these resources at home
Mhm.
and are are just not sure what to do with the clothes that their kids grow out of, or the toys that their kids are no longer playing with that are in great condition. And so being able to be that kind of central connector, it seemed, sustainable and, meeting a really important need. And then we really rely on volunteers to make all of this happen. And I'm really enthused and feel energetic about finding ways for people to engage civically and to feel connected I'm so connected to a mission. I want other people to have that bug
Yeah.
too. And
Yeah.
so we provide that opportunity as well. And so all of those things working together got me really excited about trying to, expand an organization that started here in Chicago 5 years ago. It's a national organization. So it's been in existence in Boston for 19 years and Philadelphia for 14 years, but was relatively new here. And we really knew there was a need in Chicago that we could help meet.
Yeah. And when I was researching the organization, one thing that stuck out to me was the discussion on childhood um, poverty. And it's interesting to think about childhood poverty because you think, well, kids don't make money, like they get allowance from their parents, but like childhood poverty, what does that really mean? And in some ways, that means that it's family poverty because
Mhm,
obviously their parents are also living in poverty, and a lot of organizations that we've talked to do talk about generational wealth, which I think then leads back to childhood poverty because if there's
mhm.
nothing before them, there may not be anything after them as well. And so for you, can you tell us about childhood poverty and why that cycle is important to really think about when thinking about all of these things that nonprofits deal with?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think if we know that the data shows that children who grow up experiencing poverty have a number of obstacles to overcome that kids who don't have that challenge when they're children
Yeah,
don't have to face. And so, there are links between school readiness and school attendance and therefore school performance related to childhood poverty. And a number of those things relate to the fact that kids may not have the things they need to get to school. And so,
yeah,
we know that one of the top 10 reasons kids don't go to school is they don't have school supplies. And so if we can play a role in removing that factor, then that's one more kid who's going to school who may not have otherwise gotten there. And if you're not going to school, then you're not achieving in school. But beyond the academic component of things, there's also social, emotional, and self-esteem issues that kids face, because if they don't feel, we talk about it in terms of clothing insecurity. So if
hmm
you don't have adequate, appropriate clothing, then you may feel really uncomfortable and you don't want to raise your hand and answer the question. And you sit in the back of the class and may not play with your peers, or you may get teased. And those things really impact a child. If we all think about when we were children, how that those kind of negative interactions impacted us,
yeah,
to have those things brought on you through no fault of your own, but just the circumstances that you're in, and no fault of your families, the circumstances they're in. um, that has a long-term impact on a child. And so we want to be able to, again, alleviate those impacts so that kids can be present, can play and engage and have positive relationships and be a part of their communities and feel good about themselves.
yeah. As you were sharing that, something that I was thinking about that I feel like has impacted kids over really probably all time, but in a different way, especially in the last 10 years, let's say, is bullying, because bullying is really a big and it is a real problem in schools. And now with social media, it's like they don't even have to, it's not even like pushing you down or, giving you a swirly or whatever, bullying, but it's, even social media or cyberbullying. And so for you, is that something that your organization has kind of talked about, or is it something that you have any insight to as to how bullying may be affecting some of these as well?
Well, so one of the things that we talk about is that one of our kind of bedrock principles is quality equals dignity. So just because someone hands us a bag of clothing for a child, that does not mean it is going to get into the hands of a child, because we want to make sure that whatever it is we provide the kids that we're serving is something that they can feel proud of, and that
Yeah.
they're going to feel, like, I'm really excited to wear this. This is like a gift, and I'm not going to get teased because I'm wearing this. that is one of the things that's very important to us, that kids are going to have that confidence, and that they will not be, put in an uncomfortable position because
Yeah.
of something that we provide. And so because of that, we ask our volunteers, look, all our clothes, they have to have no rips, no tears, no stains. They shouldn't have someone else's name in the back.
Mm.
There shouldn't be like, um, like Johnny's birthday party referenced on the t-shirt, because if the kid doesn't know Johnny or the kid's birthday party, that's not something nice to wear.
Yeah.
And even such things as like mommy's little girl. We don't know the circumstances of the kids that we're serving, and so we really want to create these things that kids are going to feel good about, because
Yeah.
that is really, driving the mission that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it'll really help people to know that you and your team consider these things, because then, I mean, we trust that people have great intentions when they're donating, and then they're donating stuff that they think someone else would enjoy, but maybe they don't think about the fact that, oh, if that's not that child's name, or if that child isn't being if their guardian isn't also their parent, then those things they may not be able to connect with them, or they may trigger certain things, and they may not have good memories around those things, and so it's not a good item for that particular child. And so I think it'll help people to know that you and your team really think those things through, and I know I really appreciate it, and I'm sure they do as well. um, I- I'd like for you to share with us about the parents, and sort of how the parents interact with you, and how it helps them when you partner with them to help get their child ready for school, or help make sure that they have everything they need when they can't necessarily provide all of those things themselves.
Right. So I think, as a parent myself, I feel a real affinity to the families and the parents that we engage with. And I should
Yeah.
say that the way we serve kids is, we have about 59 social service agency partners. So those are schools, and those are homeless shelters, and boys and girls clubs, and after school programs, and YMCA's. And the teachers or the social workers or the caseworkers at those partners order through us for the kids that they're serving. And so, someone at the YMCA may have Susie in class, and she's 6 and she wears a 7-8 and she needs a coat and boots this winter. That social worker will go in and order in an online system
Okay.
for that child. And then the social worker picks up from us. We have a warehouse in Logan Square, and on occasion we also deliver, but oftentimes people are picking up from us. So we don't have a ton of direct interaction with the families that we're
Okay.
serving, because we're going through social service agencies. That said, we do hear a lot through our partners about the families and their needs and their circumstances. And, certainly during the pandemic, but before the pandemic, we would hear from families who, there was a particular mom I'm thinking of who came to us through Carol Robertson Center, which is a child care center. And she had 4 kids, and she was a single mom, and her kids were like 8 years old and under. And she was working during the pandemic, but her hours had been cut, and
Mm.
she still had to pay, her rent and electricity and food and medicine. And so the question was, how was she going to get her kids winter coats and boots and toys for the holidays? And she didn't know how to, and that was giving her sleepless nights. And I can understand that as a parent myself,
Yeah.
how you'd have those sleepless nights. And so if we can provide some of those things, which we can, the coats and the boots, and sometimes the toys, and other items, then those are a number of expenses that family doesn't have to be concerned with, and they can focus their resources on something else, and maybe save a little bit if that's possible. But even if not, then they're paying the medical bill that they need to pay, or
Yeah.
they're paying the heating bill they need to pay. And so I think I really feel connected to the relief I think that we're able to provide for parents, when they're in a tough circumstance and they don't know, how they're going to meet all these needs.
Yeah. When your volunteers come and they serve alongside you and um, they see what you're doing and maybe they hear about other families who have been helped by the organization, how does that change them? What does that change about their family dynamic when they get to see this whole thing happen and know that they're making a big difference in the way of providing resources? Not just money, though. Money is important, as we talked about. You need money to make all this happen. But when you're actually putting resources in kids' hands and families get to be a part of that, how does that change these families that are volunteering, or how they think about, you know, the way that the world works?
I think that that's one of the most special things about the work that we do is providing people with a really tangible experience to see the impact that they're going to have. And so it's very real to people when they come to the warehouse and they're sorting clothing. And so that means that they're picking up, all these different pieces of clothing, pants and tops and dresses, and looking at them and saying, oh, this is quality. Oh, and I'm going to put it in this bin and a child is going to get it. I
Yeah,
think it makes it feel very real to them that the need is out there. And I think it makes it emotional oftentimes for them to realize that there are kids who have to rely on us because they don't have the ability to get their clothes elsewhere. And I also think I hear often from many of the people who are more deeply involved with us about how important this is for them to experience as a family. And we take children as young as 5 to volunteer with their families. And I think for those kids it's a fun activity, first of all.
yeah,
It's a fun environment to be in, and it's kind of a fun sorting activity. But a lot of families talk about going home after that and saying, why don't we look through your closet
yeah,
and see what are the things that you don't wear anymore, that we could give, because you saw that there are a number of kids who don't have these items, and you do. And I think that
yeah,
it enables that conversation for kids at a really young age to think about their civic responsibility, their kind of the social contract that we live in. We don't have to use those words, but I think it really builds that connection and builds that empathy that we're trying to build in our children today.
yeah. And with this sort of, for lack of a better term, I'll say like 360-degree um, effort that you're doing, where families are getting resources and families are also learning about families that need the resources, and how they're making a difference for them. With that in mind, what do you hope for the future of Chicago as we continue to work towards, getting resources in the hands of those who need it in communities that need it, and also like trying to be better for the greater good? What do you hope for the future for Chicago and for Cradles to Crayons Chicago?
I would love to work myself out of a job, um, where we were in an environment where people didn't need what we're offering.
Yeah,
But I don't foresee that happening in the near future. And so, my hope really is that we continue to have that Cradles to Crayons and the other organizations that are like us and that are our peers and that we partner with are able to continue to educate our community about the need that exists. And I think,
yeah,
the pandemic has really brought a lot of that to light, that people have felt, really saw, and we felt a lot of community support during the pandemic because people understood that there was a deep need. But what I would say to that is there was a deep need way before the pandemic,
yeah,
and the families that we serve, we're continuing to serve today, and that need has not changed. The demand that we experienced during the during 2020 hasn't really lessened for us in 2021. And so I think, my hope is that people in our community understand that there is a lot of struggle around us, and that we owe it to these families who are people like us, um, and these kids who are really what we need to create a vibrant future for our community, that we have to invest in them, and that we have to look at that as a responsibility and as an honor to be able to do it.
yeah, yeah. Tell us what Cradles to Crayons Chicago has coming up that people may be able to partner with you in.
Sure. So we are in need, what I love about Cradles is that you can get involved however you want. If you have time, we have volunteering opportunities for you. If you have stuff, if you have kids' stuff, we have drop off locations all around the city and you can drop off that stuff. And we will, give it a second life. And if you have money that you would like to donate, we will take that too to keep those lights on and buy the diapers and the hygiene supplies that we need that have to be new and that we can get in bulk. And so there are lots of different ways that people can engage, and those ways are always there. We are entering, it's hard to believe, although it's a little gray outside today, that we are about to enter into winter. And that is a period of really significant need for the families that we're serving, because anyone who's had a kid or a niece or nephew or a grandkid knows that when you wake up on, November 1st and snow's on the ground, you're like, oh no, that coat is too small and those boots are too small and we need
Yeah.
to get new stuff. And so, the families that we serve have that experience too. And so we do a big collection called Gear Up for Winter. In fact, our whole initiative in the wintertime is called Gear Up for Winter. And we'll be doing a collection that last week of October 25th to the 30th, collecting all around the city for winter items. And then also really encouraging volunteers, although we have volunteers every day, really 4 days a week and on weekends as well. We are focusing on volunteering that week in particular. But, really our big focus is wanting to get warm items into the hands of kids as soon as we can, because, those cold days are just around the corner, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we would encourage everyone to go to cradlestocrayons.org. That is the website home of your organization, and they can certainly find out more ways to partner with you there. We'll make sure to put all the ways in the link here as well, so that people can easily go on and find how to give whatever they have, whatever those resources are that they have. And so we want to make sure that we do that, because we think you lead a great organization, and it's important work. And so we're happy to partner with you in that, and we hope that our listeners will join us in that. So, Shoshana, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It was really interesting hearing about you and the organization and what you're doing. We think it's great, and we hope that you're around as long as the need is there, because, hopefully one day there won't be a need, but as long as it's there, we know that you and your organization will be there doing that uphill battle.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the interest and the willingness to share our story and the stories of the families that we serve.
Yeah. Well, we love building partnerships, and so it won't end here, but we'll certainly uh, hear from you again in the future and see how things are going. But we'll reach out, and we love these partnerships. So thank you. And obviously, we want to thank our listeners for tuning into this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. You can find this episode and all the others at www.bridgingchicago.com. There's so many amazing organizations to hear about who are doing great work. And so thanks again, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions, and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.